She entered the mansion everyone feared, but what followed would change everything. Watch till the end, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Under the blazing California sun, the towering wrought iron gates of the Bradford estate shimmered like black steel guardians, imposing and silent. They stood at the edge of Beverly Hills' wealthiest neighborhood, the kind of gates that made passersby slow down to admire their elegance. Ornate scrolls polished to perfection, each detail catching the light as if freshly forged. Beyond them stretched a flawless driveway, paved in pale stone and lined with stately palm trees. At its end rose the mansion itself, immaculate white walls, gleaming windows, and marble balconies that seemed to belong not to a home, but to a monument. To outsiders, the estate was breathtaking, a vision of wealth. But for those who whispered behind closed doors, it was something else entirely. It was cursed ground, not by spirits, but by cruelty. Within those immaculate walls, no black housekeeper had lasted long. Not one. In just 6 months, 9 maids had come and gone, fleeing the humiliation that festered inside. Some ran away in the middle of the night, leaving their few belongings behind. One had climbed the back fence barefoot, feet bleeding as she stumbled into the darkness, clutching nothing but the strength to escape. Everyone in the neighborhood spoke of it in hushed tones, of the mistress who broke every servant who dared to stay. That mistress was Lydia Bradford. 32 years old, nearly 3 decades younger than her husband, she was as dazzling as she was dangerous. Tall and slender, with golden hair that gleamed in the California sun, icy blue eyes that cut like blades, and a presence that consumed every room she entered. Even a stroll through her gardens meant wearing a designer gown, her heels echoing on the marble like a queen's announcement. The air around her carried the faint trace of imported perfume, an invisible crown. But beneath the beauty lay venom. Lydia's words could strike sharper than knives, and her hands had been known to slap or shove without warning. She wielded her cruelty with purpose, her racism with precision. Every maid she had hired was a poor black woman, and every one of them had endured her disdain, mocked for their skin, their heritage, their supposed uncivilized ways. To Lydia, maids were disposable tools, no different than a pair of shoes she might cast aside when bored. Her husband, billionaire real estate mogul James Bradford, stayed silent. His empire consumed his time, and as long as the house sparkled and his image remained untarnished, what happened behind those gates was of no concern to him. But on this morning, under the searing sun and shifting shadows of palm trees, a new figure stood at the gate. Jasmine Carter adjusted the strap of her worn fabric bag, gripping it tightly. Inside lay only a few changes of clothes and a small photograph of her daughter, Issa, 8 years old, fragile, bound to a wheelchair since birth by a congenital heart condition. Issa's smile in the picture was faint, her eyes hopeful but tired. Jasmine's stomach clenched at the thought of her daughter lying in a hospital bed, waiting, always waiting. The surgery she needed was impossibly expensive, far beyond Jasmine's reach, but the Bradford estate promised high pay if she could last. 3 months, Jasmine told herself, 3 months of endurance, no matter the cost. That would be enough to gather the money Issa needed. She pressed the intercom. The gates swung open slowly, silently, like jaws parting for prey. Waiting inside the courtyard was Margaret Davis, the longtime housekeeper. Her silver hair was pinned immaculately, her back ramrod straight. She looked Jasmine up and down, her gaze lingering on the shade of her skin, before speaking curtly. "Follow me." No welcome, no smile, only command. As Jasmine stepped through the courtyard, she felt eyes upon her. By gleaming black Mercedes, chauffeur Ben Thomas leaned casually, watching with a cool, unreadable gaze. From a kitchen window, the head cook, Nancy Owens, crossed her arms and studied her as though she were an intruder. All of them were white. And in their silence, in their stares, Jasmine felt the message, unspoken but clear. You do not belong here. Inside, Margaret led her to the grand living room. White marble floors gleamed like still water. Gold-framed mirrors lined the walls, reflecting endless wealth. Margaret gestured to the floor with a flick of her hand. Clean this. Madame will be down shortly. Jasmine hesitated only a moment before kneeling with a cloth. Each careful stroke was a vow to herself. Do not lose this job. Do not fail Isa. The sound of heels cut through the silence like a blade. Sharp, deliberate, echoing down the grand staircase. Lydia Bradford descended, her silk wine-red dress draping perfectly over her form, golden hair swept into a flawless updo. In one hand she carried a porcelain teacup. She didn't need to announce herself, the air shifted in her presence. Her gaze swept over Jasmine, pausing on her hands, her skin. Her lips curved, but not in kindness. The new maid? Yes, ma'am. My name is Jasmine, she replied, bowing her head politely. Lydia didn't answer. Instead, she looked at the spotless marble floor, raised her teacup, and with a deliberate flick of her wrist, tilted it. Hot liquid spilled across the white stone, a dark stain spreading like a wound. Jasmine recoiled slightly, startled, but Lydia only smiled. This floor was already clean before you touched it. I'll never understand why they keep sending me lazy, clumsy people like you. Around them, staff paused their work to watch. That was the point. Lydia's humiliation was always a performance. Clean it, she ordered. Jasmine lowered herself again, knees pressing into the cold marble, cloth in hand. Whispers of mockery drifted around her. Her cheeks burned, but she kept her head down. In her mind, only Isa's face mattered. 3 months, she whispered silently. Just 3 months. That night, long after the house had quieted, Jasmine sat alone in the laundry room. The hum of machines filled the air, the faint smell of detergent clinging to the walls. From her bag, she pulled the photograph of Isa. The little girl's thin arms rested on the sides of her wheelchair, her smile brave despite the hardship in her eyes. Jasmine pressed the picture to her chest, whispering a promise. Beside her lay the hospital bill, the cruel list of costs printed in stark black ink. She traced the numbers with trembling fingers. It was a mountain she could never climb alone. Her heart ached with the weight of it. She didn't hear the footsteps until the door slammed open. Lydia stood in the doorway, eyes sharp, her silhouette framed by the harsh overhead light. Jasmine froze, panic shooting through her veins. In a rush, she stuffed the photo and bill into her pocket. Rising too quickly, she nearly stumbled, muttered a nervous, "Excuse me," and hurried past her mistress. But in her haste, a single sheet fluttered from her pocket and landed silently on the floor. Lydia's eyes followed it. She stepped inside, picked up the crumpled paper, and smoothed it with manicured fingers. Her gaze moved over the words, the total, the hospital's name. Then she saw the photograph left behind on the laundry table. A little girl, brown eyes, fragile body, a wheelchair. For the first time, Lydia did not smile. She stared at the photo and the bill, her icy eyes unblinking. The hum of the machines filled the silence, and the night around the Bradford estate felt heavier than ever. The night air in the Bradford estate carried its usual sterile silence, but Lydia Bradford was not sleeping. The hospital bill and photograph she had picked up from the laundry room lay on her polished mahogany desk. She turned the papers over in her hands, her blue eyes scanning each line again and again. The name printed at the top of the bill was clear: Isa Carter. The girl's image stared back at her from the faded photograph, trapped in the frame of her wheelchair, thin arms resting like fragile branches, smile forced against the weight of illness. Lydia set her glass of wine down untouched. She was not sentimental, not easily moved. She had built her authority in this house through sharpness, not softness. Yet something about the sight of that bill, the impossible cost scribbled in black ink, clung to her thoughts like a thorn. By midnight she had made her decision. She picked up the phone and dialed a number. The clinic's receptionist answered groggily, but Lydia's voice carried no hesitation. "This is Mrs. Bradford. Confirm the Carter file. Congenital heart condition, pediatric. I want the projected surgical cost, the timeline, and the survival rate if treatment is delayed." There was a pause, papers rustling. When the receptionist spoke again, her tone was subdued. "The patient needs surgery as soon as possible. Without it—" She hesitated. "The risk increases significantly. The total cost exceeds $200,000, not including post-operative care." Lydia's grip tightened on the receiver. $200,000. For her, a trivial sum, no more than the price of a necklace. For a maid like Jasmine, an immovable wall. She hung up without another word. The next morning dawned cloudless. Lydia appeared at breakfast with her usual grace, her emerald dress shimmering beneath the chandelier. James Bradford was already seated, his tablet open, skimming market reports. He looked up briefly when his wife sat across from him. "You were awake late," he remarked casually. "I had business," she replied smoothly. Then she set the hospital bill on the table, sliding it toward him. "This is Jasmine Carter's daughter." James's brow furrowed slightly. He glanced at the paper but didn't pick it up. "And why does that concern you?" "Because she will die without surgery, because the woman scrubbing our floors every night is trying to carry this alone, and because this house, our house, has turned into a pit that devours people. That's why it concerns me." James leaned back in his chair, his expression calm but guarded. "Lydia, you know as well as I do, I don't involve myself with the staff. If she needs assistance, there are programs, charities—" "No," Lydia cut in sharply, her eyes narrowing. "Not programs, not charities. Us. We have the means. You will call the hospital and settle this bill. Every expense, every treatment. You will also raise her position in this house. I will not watch another woman break under these walls." For a moment, James was silent, the only sound the faint clink of silverware from the adjoining kitchen. His wife rarely spoke with such urgency, and when she did, he had learned not to dismiss her. Still, hesitation lingered in his features. "And what do you expect in return? Gratitude? Loyalty?" "I expect nothing," Lydia said coldly, "except the knowledge that this family is not as hollow as everyone thinks. She doesn't need to know it came from us. She only needs to see her daughter walk again." James studied her carefully. He had built empires on calculated risks, on deals measured to the last decimal. But here was a deal of a different kind, one that involved not profit but conscience. Finally, he picked up the bill and held it in his hand, his thumb pressing against the figure at the bottom. He didn't answer her. He only rose from his chair and walked into his study. A moment later, she heard his voice on the phone, low and steady. "Good morning. This is James Bradford. I need to arrange immediate payment for a patient at your hospital. The name is Isa Carter. Yes, all expenses, surgery, medication, post-operative care, everything. Send me the final invoice today." Lydia remained seated at the table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Outwardly, she was calm, her expression unchanged. But beneath the surface something shifted, like the faint cracking of ice under spring sunlight. Later that day, she passed Jasmine in the hall. The maid was polishing the carved banister, head bowed, movements careful. Lydia slowed her steps just enough to watch her, to measure the woman's silence. Jasmine looked up briefly, her eyes meeting hers. For a flicker of a second, fear showed in Jasmine's gaze before she quickly lowered it again. Lydia said nothing. She simply continued past, heels clicking against the marble. But inside, she carried the weight of what she now knew: the bill, the photograph, the frail girl in the wheelchair. That evening, when James returned from his office, he found Lydia waiting in the study. She was standing by the window, her silhouette framed against the fading light. "It's done," he said, setting a stack of papers on the desk. "The hospital has confirmed receipt. The surgery is scheduled within days." Lydia turned her head slightly, her golden hair catching the last rays of sun. "Good. Then we will speak to her tomorrow." James raised an eyebrow. "Speak to her?" "Yes," Lydia said firmly. "Not as a maid, as a mother." Outside, the sky deepened into twilight. The Bradford estate, so often a place of bitterness and fear, seemed to hold its breath. For Jasmine, the days ahead would bring a revelation she could not yet imagine. And for Lydia, the path she had chosen would alter the house in ways she had never intended. The next morning broke clear and bright, golden sunlight pouring through the Bradford estate's tall windows. The house, usually brimming with quiet tension, carried an unusual stillness. Jasmine Carter awoke before dawn as always, slipping into her plain uniform and smoothing the wrinkles with careful hands. She moved silently down the servants' corridor, clutching the photograph of Isa in her pocket, whispering the same words she told herself each morning. 3 months. Just 3 months. She did not know that her life was about to change before the day ended. Margaret, the housekeeper, found her polishing the stair rail. Her expression was unreadable as she handed Jasmine a slip of paper. "Madam wants to see you in the study. Immediately." Jasmine's heart sank. Normally, a summons meant humiliation. She wiped her hands on her apron, steadied herself, and followed. The study door stood open. Inside, James Bradford sat in a leather chair behind the heavy desk, his tablet set aside for once. Lydia stood nearby, her posture as flawless as ever, a faint gleam in her eyes that Jasmine could not interpret. "Come in," Lydia said, her tone calm but commanding. Jasmine stepped forward, hands folded before her, head slightly bowed. "Yes, ma'am?" James glanced at his wife, then spoke. "We know about your daughter, Isa." The words hit Jasmine like a blow. Her head snapped up, eyes wide, fear flashing across her face. Please, I'm sorry, sir, I never meant—" "Enough," Lydia cut in sharply but not cruelly. "We're not here to punish you. We're here to tell you that her surgery has been arranged. It will be covered in full. Every expense, the procedure, the hospital stay, the medication, the aftercare, everything." For a long moment, Jasmine could not move. She stared at them, breath caught in her throat, her hands trembling. I don't understand." "You don't need to," Lydia replied evenly. "You only need to prepare her. The date is already set. Within days, Isa will have her chance." Tears blurred Jasmine's vision before she could stop them. She dropped to her knees, overcome by emotion, her voice breaking. Thank you, ma'am, sir. I don't know how—" "Stand up," Lydia interrupted again, but this time her tone softened. "You don't kneel before me. Not for this." Slowly, shakily, Jasmine rose to her feet. The air in the room seemed lighter, though her chest still felt heavy with disbelief. She pressed her hands to her lips, fighting for composure. James leaned forward, his expression uncharacteristically gentle. "Your daughter deserves this chance. You deserve this chance. Take it." Jasmine bowed her head deeply, whispering, I will never forget this." That afternoon, arrangements moved quickly. James's office coordinated with the hospital, securing the best surgical team. A private car was assigned for transport. Jasmine received a short list of instructions: dates, forms, medical preparations. She clutched each paper as though it were made of gold. For the rest of the staff, whispers filled the corridors. Margaret, who had once looked down at Jasmine with icy disdain, avoided her gaze, but her movements were less sharp. Nancy, the cook, no longer folded her arms when Jasmine entered the kitchen. Even Ben, the chauffeur, regarded her differently, his eyes less appraising, almost respectful. Though no one spoke openly, they all knew something had shifted. Jasmine, the maid they had dismissed as temporary, had become someone untouchable, protected by the mistress herself. That night, Jasmine sat in her tiny room, holding Issa's photo. For the first time in months, her heart swelled not with fear, but with hope. She whispered to the smiling face, "Just a little longer, baby. Just a little longer." 2 days later, the black Mercedes pulled to a stop outside the hospital. Jasmine held Issa's hand tightly as they entered the sterile halls. The girl looked small in her wheelchair, her eyes wide, both frightened and excited. "Mom," Issa whispered, "am I really going to get better?" "Yes," Jasmine murmured, stroking her daughter's hair. "Yes, you are." The doctors explained everything with calm efficiency. Jasmine signed forms with trembling hands, each stroke of the pen a promise she could finally keep. Lydia appeared briefly in the waiting area, her emerald dress out of place amid the hospital's muted colors. She did not sit, but stood nearby, her gaze steady on Jasmine. When the moment came, Issa was wheeled through the double doors of the operating room. Jasmine clutched her daughter's hand until the last possible second, whispering, "I'll be right here when you wake up." The doors closed. Silence followed. Jasmine sank into a chair, her body trembling with the weight of it. Hours stretched like years. Each time the doors swung open, her breath caught, only to find it was a nurse passing through. She closed her eyes and prayed silently, her hands clasped so tightly they ached. Then, at last, the surgeon emerged. Dr. Helen Foster pulled down her mask, a faint smile on her face. "The surgery went perfectly. Issa is stable. She'll recover fully." Jasmine gasped, a sob escaping before she could hold it back. Her legs nearly gave out as she stood, tears streaming freely. "Thank you. Oh, God, thank you." In the recovery room, Issa lay pale but peaceful, her breathing steady, a faint blush of color returning to her cheeks. Jasmine sat beside her, taking her small hand, whispering, "You're going to be all right now." Later, back at the Bradford estate, Jasmine stepped out of the car and saw Lydia waiting at the top of the steps. Her usual cold control was absent. Instead, her eyes searched Jasmine's face. "Issa?" she asked simply. "The surgery was a success," Jasmine replied, her voice trembling with joy. "She'll recover." For the first time since Jasmine had arrived at the mansion, Lydia's lips curved into a genuine smile. "Good." The words were plain, but the air around them felt transformed. The Bradford mansion, once a place of cruelty, now carried a fragile new thread of hope. The Bradford estate never looked the same to Jasmine Carter after Issa's surgery. Though the white marble walls and endless polished floors remained as pristine as ever, the atmosphere had shifted. For the first time since she had crossed the gates, Jasmine walked through the hallways with a lightness in her step, her daughter's survival giving her strength she had not dared to imagine before. Issa was recovering well at the hospital. Each day the doctors reported progress, and soon she would be strong enough to leave the wheelchair. Every time Jasmine saw her daughter smile with new energy, she whispered a prayer of gratitude. The impossible debt had been erased, replaced with the future that now seemed within reach. Back at the mansion, Lydia Bradford summoned Jasmine to the study. Jasmine entered cautiously, expecting perhaps another task or command, though her heart told her things were no longer the same. Lydia sat behind the desk, her posture straight, her hands resting lightly on the polished surface. James was beside her, his face calm and measured. Lydia looked directly at Jasmine, her eyes no longer filled with disdain, but something closer to acknowledgement. "Starting today," Lydia said, her tone firm, "you will take charge of the household staff. You will oversee daily operations, schedules, and discipline. Margaret will step aside." Jasmine's breath caught. She stared, unable to process the words. "Madam, You have earned it," Lydia interrupted, her voice carrying no room for debate. "Your strength, your patience, your dignity have proven what none of the others could. This house needs order, and you will bring it." James nodded in agreement. "You've already shown more leadership than many who came before. We trust you." Tears welled in Jasmine's eyes, though she fought to keep her composure. "Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. I'll do my best." That afternoon, the staff gathered in the main hall. Lydia stood at the top of the staircase, Jasmine beside her. The announcement was clear and public. Jasmine was now the manager of the estate, the one to whom all others would answer. The reaction was mixed. Margaret's lips tightened, her face pale with barely hidden resentment. For years she had been the mistress of order, and now she was replaced by the very maid she once dismissed as unworthy. Ben Thomas, the chauffeur, kept his expression neutral, though his eyes flickered with doubt. Nancy Owens, the cook, raised her brows in surprise, but said nothing, her folded arms hiding her unease. The following days tested Jasmine in ways she had not expected. For every instruction she gave, there seemed to be a quiet resistance. Margaret deliberately delayed cleaning schedules, claiming confusion. Ben left the car keys misplaced, forcing Jasmine to waste precious time. Even Nancy made subtle jabs, questioning whether Jasmine had the experience to make decisions about the kitchen. But Jasmine did not bend. She handled each challenge with calm authority. When Margaret argued about duties, Jasmine replied evenly, "You've done this long enough to know the schedule. If you refuse, you'll leave me no choice but to report it." When Ben failed to prepare the car, Jasmine checked the log herself, marking the oversight in clear ink. To Nancy, she said firmly, "This kitchen feeds the household. You know your work well, but now I will decide how things are organized." Her tone carried no malice, only certainty, and in time the resistance weakened. The staff realized that this was no longer the timid maid they had mocked, but a woman who held the full authority of the Bradfords. Lydia watched all of it closely. She made no effort to interfere, but each time she passed through the hall she offered subtle support. Once, when Margaret complained directly to her, Lydia's reply was sharp. "Jasmine is in charge. You will follow her orders or you will leave." Margaret said nothing more. The greatest test came when the word spread that James's extended family was coming for dinner. They were old money, proud, and critical, and they had never accepted Lydia as a true part of their world. The dinner would be more than a meal. It would be a performance of power, an examination of the household itself. Preparations began days in advance. Jasmine oversaw every detail: the table settings, the floral arrangements, the sequence of courses. She walked through the mansion like a conductor guiding an orchestra, her eyes sharp, her words precise. On the evening of the dinner, the mansion glowed with chandeliers and polished silver. Guests arrived in sleek cars, their voices dripping with the confidence of privilege. Jasmine, dressed in her modest uniform, stood at the edge of the hall, quietly ensuring that everything moved flawlessly. But problems arose, as they always did. Midway through preparations, a key piece of equipment in the kitchen failed. The main oven flickered and went cold. Nancy panicked, rushing to Jasmine. "It's ruined. The lamb will be raw. The entire dinner's spoiled." The staff looked at Jasmine, expecting her to falter. Instead, she acted swiftly. "Switch to the secondary oven. Cut the portions smaller. Serve the appetizers slower to buy time." Her orders snapped into place and the kitchen moved again. In the dining hall, the courses appeared without delay. None of the guests realized how close disaster had come. Lydia, seated at the head of the long table, lifted her glass and glanced at Jasmine across the room. For the first time, her smile was not one of cruelty, but of pride. Still, tension lingered. James's relatives whispered among themselves, their eyes darting toward Jasmine. To them, she was still just a servant, now daring to act above her station. Their disdain simmered beneath the polished surface. The dinner ended without visible flaw, but Jasmine could feel the weight of their judgment. She knew that the final test had not yet come. As the guests lingered in the grand hall, one of James's cousins, a man with a cold smile, murmured loud enough for others to hear, "Strange choice, lettin' the help run the house. Standards must be slippin'." Laughter rippled softly among the relatives. Jasmine stood silent, her head held high, refusing to react. Lydia's gaze swept the room, sharp as a blade, but she held her tongue, for now. The night closed with polite farewells, but beneath the surface, the challenge had only begun. The day after the dinner, the Bradford estate seemed suspended between silence and storm. Jasmine Carter walked the halls early in the morning, checking rooms and schedules, her heart steady despite the unease that still hung in the air. The whispers from James's relatives had reached her ears. She knew they had judged her, the maid turned manager, as unworthy. Yet she also knew she could not allow their words to undo what she had built. The evening brought the true test. James's family returned, gathered in the grand dining room for a formal dinner, the long mahogany table gleaming with crystal glasses and polished silver. Chandeliers flooded the hall with light, every detail arranged with Jasmine's precision. Issa, still recovering but smiling, had been moved into the estate temporarily and rested upstairs. The thought of her daughter gave Jasmine strength. The relatives arrived in silk gowns and tailored suits, their voices carrying the casual arrogance of people certain of their superiority. They greeted James with practiced smiles, ignored Lydia's presence as much as they dared, and cast curious, skeptical glances at Jasmine, who stood at the edge of the room, guiding staff with quiet authority. Dinner began smoothly. The staff moved like clockwork under Jasmine's direction. The first course, a delicate soup, was served without delay. The second, a fine fish dish, followed seamlessly. Guests complimented the food, though their words carried little warmth. Then, at the height of the meal, disaster struck. A servant tripped near the table, spilling a tray of wine glasses onto the floor. Crimson liquid splattered across the white Persian rug, shards of glass scattering like ice. The room froze. Guests gasped. All eyes turned to Jasmine. She moved instantly, her voice calm but firm. "Clear the glass. Replace the rug covering immediately. Continue serving the main course." Her orders cut through the tension, and the staff obeyed without hesitation. Within minutes the scene was contained, the courses resumed, and the dignity of the evening salvaged. But one of James's uncles leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a sneer. "Remarkable," he said loudly so the entire table could hear. "A servant playing the mistress of the house. Tell me, James, is this what your fortune has come to, letting the help command your family's table?" The words rippled through the room like poison. Several guests smirked, others shifted uncomfortably. Jasmine stood tall at the far end of the hall, her hands steady, though her chest tightened. She had endured insults before, but never before so publicly, never before in the house she now managed. James's gaze moved slowly across the table, his jaw tightening. Lydia's eyes burned with cold fire. For a moment, the silence was so heavy it seemed to press on the marble walls themselves. Then James rose from his seat. His voice, usually reserved, carried with rare force. "Enough!" The word rang out like a gavel. The smirks faded, the whispers died. Every eye turned to him. "This woman," James said, gesturing to Jasmine, "has brought more peace and dignity to this house than anyone else in years. She's not a servant playing at power. She's the manager of this estate with my full authority, and she will be treated with respect." Lydia rose beside him, her emerald gown shimmering under the chandelier. "I will not allow anyone, family or not, to undermine her. Jasmine has endured what none of you could. She has shown strength, grace, and loyalty. If you cannot accept that, then you do not belong in this house." The relatives shifted uneasily. Some looked away, others muttered under their breath. But the weight of James's declaration could not be denied. For the first time, Jasmine stood not as a maid beneath their gaze, but as a leader shielded by the very owners of the estate. The dinner continued in uneasy silence. The sharp edge of arrogance dulled. When the final course was served, no one dared another insult. The guests departed with polite farewells, their pride wounded but their tongues restrained. After the last car had left the driveway, the mansion exhaled. The staff gathered in the main hall, uncertain of what the night's events meant. Then James and Lydia stepped forward. "From this day," James said, his voice steady, "Jasmine is the steward of this house. Her word is law here, and she has our trust. This is no longer a house of fear. It will be a house of dignity." The words carried through the hall like a blessing. Margaret lowered her gaze, finally silent. Nancy offered a small nod. Ben gave a respectful bow of his head. One by one, the staff accepted what could no longer be denied. Later that night, Jasmine walked alone through the gardens. The palm trees swayed gently in the warm air, their fronds whispering in the breeze. She thought of Isa upstairs, safe and healing, her laughter already filling the halls. She thought of the long days of humiliation, the nights of silent tears, the weight she had carried. Lydia joined her in the garden, her footsteps soft on the gravel path. For a long moment, they stood side by side in silence. Then Lydia spoke quietly, without her usual armor. "You've changed this house more than I ever imagined possible." Jasmine looked at her, her voice calm but strong. "We changed it together." They shared a brief, wordless understanding. Two women whose lives had collided in conflict but had emerged bound by something stronger than resentment. In the days that followed, Isa grew stronger. She took her first steps in the garden, her mother's hand steadying her, laughter ringing like music. The staff watched from a distance, their eyes softened, their expressions transformed. The Bradford mansion, once cursed ground where no black maid had lasted, had become a place of hope. Not because the walls had changed, but because the hearts within them had. Some battles do not just reshape lives, they reshape homes, they reshape hearts. And for Jasmine Carter and her daughter Isa, the future now stood wide open. Some battles don't just change lives, they change hearts. If this story moved you, like the video, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts in the comments below.